The husband humiliates and abandons his wife and sick son. "Once again taking care of that boy, you don't even have time to satisfy me anymore," said the cruel husband to his wife. But he never imagined that, thanks to his own son, he could. Evelyn was sitting beside her son Colin's hospital bed, watching how the tubes connected to his small body seemed to multiply with each visit from the doctor. The monotonous sound of the machine monitoring his vital signs filled the room, but for her, it was almost imperceptible. Her entire focus was on Colin's weak and slow breathing. The soft afternoon light filtered through the window, bathing the room in warm tones, a heartbreaking contrast to the cold metal and white walls surrounding her. Her hand gently stroked her son's, while her heart beat with a mixture of sadness and hope. Colin, only 8 years old, was fighting an illness that seemed relentless. The doctors had said it was terminal, but Evelyn refused to accept that word. Not while her son could still open his eyes, even if just for a few moments. Not while his little heart kept beating. Evelyn's phone vibrated on the table beside the bed, pulling her from her reverie. She picked it up with trembling hands, knowing exactly who was calling. Jonas. Her husband, though lately that word seemed hollow, distant. The screen showed his name, and she felt a knot in her stomach as she debated whether to answer. Finally, she slid her finger across the screen. "Hello," Evelyn said in a tired voice. "Evelyn, are you at the hospital with Colin again?" Jonas's voice sounded irritated, as if he were asking an unnecessary question. "Yes, Jonas. You know I am. Colin had a relapse 2 days ago. The doctors are worried." There was silence on the other end, but it wasn't the kind that comes from concern. Jonas took a deep breath, and before Evelyn could say anything more, he continued, his voice cutting like a knife. "Once again taking care of that boy, you don't even have time for me anymore. Evelyn, do you realize what it's been like living with you these past few months?" Jonas spoke with a mix of frustration and selfishness, leaving no room for empathy. Jonas's words hit her like an unexpected storm. Evelyn felt her chest tighten as if the air had been taken from her. How could he talk that way about his own son? She wanted to yell at him, to remind him that Colin was his responsibility too, but the words caught in her throat. Instead of fighting, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to find calm. "Jonas, this is our son. He's fighting for his life," she replied in a controlled voice, trying not to break down. "This isn't the time for this." Jonas scoffed on the other end, and Evelyn could almost see him shrugging, as if what she said didn't matter at all. "I can't take this anymore, Evelyn. I'm tired. Tired of seeing you always there, glued to that boy. There's no room for us, for what we used to be. You know what? I can't keep doing this." Before Evelyn could respond, the call ended. She remained holding the phone, staring at the screen as silence filled the room once more. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she made no effort to wipe it away. She felt the deep pain of betrayal mix with the emotional exhaustion that had already consumed her for months. She knew Jonas had changed since Colin got sick, but she never imagined he would abandon her when she needed him most. At that moment, the door to the room opened. It was a nurse, her face kind and familiar. Evelyn quickly composed herself, forcing a smile. "How's Colin?" The nurse asked with a warm smile, though her eyes were already scanning the machines surrounding the bed. "Stable for now. But the doctors say they don't know how much longer he can hold on," Evelyn responded, her voice breaking, but trying to stay strong. The nurse nodded, stepping closer to the bed to check the monitors. "He's a fighter. We all know it, and so are you," she said softly, her hand resting briefly on Evelyn's shoulder. "Thank you," Evelyn replied, wanting to believe those words. After the nurse left, Evelyn was alone again with Colin. She watched as her son's chest rose and fell slowly, and she felt that, despite everything, she couldn't give up. Colin needed her. But how could she face all of this alone? Jonas wasn't coming back. She knew it. He had always been someone who ran away when things got tough. And now, he'd found the perfect excuse to leave. She got up from the chair and walked to the window, trying to find comfort in the cityscape that stretched beyond the hospital. The fading light of the evening was beginning to disappear, and the night, with its dark cloak, was taking over the sky. Evelyn felt like her life had also been enveloped by that darkness, with no apparent way out. As she looked out onto the street, her phone vibrated again. For a second, she thought it might be Jonas again, but when she picked it up, she saw a strange message on the screen. It wasn't from Jonas or any number she recognized. There was only one sentence that made her heart stop. "I'm watching you." Evelyn frowned, reading the message over and over as if doing so might help her make sense of it. Who could have sent it? A cruel joke? But at that moment, she didn't have the energy to worry. She put the phone in her pocket, trying to convince herself it was just a mistake. She returned to Colin's side, taking his small hand in hers once more. She sat down, closed her eyes, and let the exhaustion wash over her. She knew that tomorrow would be another day of fighting, another day of facing her son's illness, her husband's absence, and now, perhaps, something darker that she still didn't understand. But in that moment, holding Colin's hand, she found a brief moment of peace. The soft sound of the machine accompanied her thoughts. Despite all the pain, Evelyn knew that the only thing that mattered was Colin. Whatever came next, she would face it when it arrived. The morning sun softly filtered through the hospital curtains, bathing Colin's room in a warm, serene light. Evelyn woke up in the chair beside his bed, still holding her son's hand. She had slept little, but that didn't matter. The days had become a routine of exhaustion and hope, of waiting for small improvements and clinging to them with all her strength. She stretched slowly, her back protesting the uncomfortable night in the chair. She looked at Colin, his small face peaceful in sleep, and for a moment, the world seemed frozen in that calm. It was in these moments, when she saw him breathe peacefully, that she remembered why she kept fighting. However, her peace was interrupted by the memory of the message she had received the night before. "I'm watching you." She thought maybe it was just a bad joke, or perhaps a message sent by mistake. But she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it had left behind. She decided to ignore it for now. Colin was her priority. The door opened, and Dr. Alvarez walked in with a faint smile, holding her clipboard with notes and results. "Good morning, Evelyn. How are you both today?" she asked, though the answer was written in the fatigue visible in Evelyn's eyes. "Colin is the same, but at least he rested a bit." "That's all that matters," Evelyn replied, forcing a smile. Dr. Alvarez nodded and moved to the monitors to check Colin's vitals. She made a few notes and turned to Evelyn with an expression that mixed professionalism and compassion. "I know these are the hardest moments, Evelyn, but I want you to know we're doing everything we can. What Colin is facing is very complicated, and while we're still searching for ways to improve his condition, we also have to be realistic about the time we have." Evelyn nodded, though each word from the doctor weighed heavily on her soul. She knew what that speech meant. She'd heard it so many times that the message was clear now. Hope was fading, and there wasn't much time left. "I know," Evelyn said, her voice breaking but firm. "I just want him to be okay, at least for one more day, just one more day." Dr. Alvarez gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder before leaving the room, leaving her alone again with Colin and her thoughts. As she looked at her son, Evelyn decided that she wouldn't let the doctor's words dictate the course of the days she had left with him. She would fight even when everyone else stopped. The sound of her phone vibrating pulled her from her thoughts. She picked it up from the table, and her heart stopped for a second as she saw a new message. This time, the text was even more disturbing. "I know what Jonas did." Evelyn felt the air around her grow heavier. Who was sending these messages? What did they know about Jonas? Her mind began to spin, trying to make sense of it all. Ever since Jonas had left her, her life had fallen apart, but she had never imagined someone was watching. She tried to respond to the number, but there was no reply. She made a decision. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She put the phone away, stood up from the chair, and walked out into the hospital corridor. She needed air, clarity to think. As she walked, The words from the message echoed in her mind. If someone knew something about Jonas, maybe there was more to his departure than she had imagined. Evelyn, a male voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Lucas, a man who had been part of her past, long before her life had spiraled into chaos. She hadn't seen him in years, and the surprise on his face was obvious. He had been a youthful love, someone who had left a deep mark on her heart, but life had taken them down different paths. And now, here he was, as if no time had passed. "Lucas, I wasn't expecting to see you here," Evelyn said, a mix of surprise and confusion in her voice. "I came to see my dad. He's in this same hospital. When I saw you walk out of the room, I couldn't help but come over. How are you?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Evelyn couldn't hold back the emotions that flooded her. She had been strong for so long, but seeing someone who had once been her support and refuge made her feel vulnerable again. "I don't know how to answer that, Lucas. Everything is broken. Colin is getting worse, and Jonas, her voice cracked. Lucas looked at her with the same warmth she remembered from years ago. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I want you to know you can count on me. You don't have to do this all alone." Evelyn looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. It had been so hard, and the offer of support was tempting. However, something inside her stopped her. Jonas had done so much damage, and Lucas was tied to her past, a past Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to open up again. "Thank you, Lucas. I really appreciate it," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "But there are things in my life I don't want to drag others into. This is complicated." Lucas nodded, understanding the wall Evelyn had built. But still, he didn't step away. "That's okay. I just wanted you to know. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'll be here." After a few awkward moments, Lucas said goodbye, leaving her alone in the corridor. Evelyn sighed and returned to Colin's room. As she sat back down beside him, her thoughts swirled. What was happening with those messages? And Lucas, his reappearance seemed too coincidental. Her phone vibrated again, and this time the message was even more direct. "Jonas didn't just betray you. He lied to you about Colin." The fear that Evelyn had buried for weeks, even months, began to surge to the surface. What did that message mean? What had Jonas done? Her mind started to connect dots she hadn't considered before. Could it be possible that Colin's illness wasn't just a cruel coincidence? Was there something more that Jonas had hidden from her? Evelyn felt the ground fall away beneath her. She looked at her son, fragile and vulnerable, and a sense of urgency took hold of her. She had to find answers. Jonas's betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined, and now it seemed even Colin's life was at stake. She knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed help. And though she hesitated, there was one person she could turn to, Lucas. Evelyn made a decision. She would face whatever it took to save her son, and if that meant uncovering secrets from the past, she would do it. Evelyn felt as if she had stepped into a dimension where every step she took brought her closer to an abyss she wasn't sure she could escape. The mysterious messages, the cryptic words about Jonas and Colin's health. Something didn't add up, and her mother's instinct told her she needed to find answers quickly. The constant fear of losing her son now mixed with the suspicion that there was something much darker behind his illness. That afternoon, Evelyn decided she could no longer wait. Though hesitant, she knew she couldn't face this mystery alone. She needed help, and the only person she could think of was Lucas. His reappearance in her life didn't seem like a simple coincidence. So, she called him, her heart racing as she waited for him to pick up. "Evelyn, I'm glad you called," Lucas said, his warm voice on the other end of the line. "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not okay, Lucas. I need to see you, to talk in person. I can't explain everything over the phone, but there are things I don't understand. And I feel like you can help me." There was a brief silence before Lucas responded. "Let's meet at the park we used to go to in half an hour." Evelyn hung up and, with one last glance at Colin, left the hospital. She knew that leaving him, even for a few hours, caused her anxiety, but she felt that she was getting closer to uncovering something crucial. As she drove to the park, the message echoed in her mind. Jonas didn't just betray you. He lied about Colin. When she arrived, Lucas was already waiting for her on one of the benches near the lake. The fresh air and calmness of the park contrasted with the internal storm Evelyn felt. She approached slowly, trying to organize her thoughts, but her emotions overwhelmed her. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said, sitting next to him. "I'll always be here for you, Evelyn." "You know that," Lucas replied, his tone calm, but with a concern he couldn't hide. "What's going on?" Evelyn rubbed her hands together, trying to find the best way to explain everything that had happened. She started with the messages, describing how each one had left her more confused and worried. Then she talked about Jonas and his abandonment, how he had returned only to discover he was hiding secrets about Colin. "What do you know about this, Lucas?" she finally asked, looking directly into his eyes, searching for any sign that he shared her confusion. "Why do I feel like there's something more I'm not seeing?" Lucas remained silent for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke. "Jonas and we have a history. We met in college and worked on a few projects together before you and he got married. What I never told you, what never came to light, is that one of those projects was an experiment, something that went wrong." Evelyn felt her heart begin to race. The word experiment hit her like a blast of cold air. "What kind of experiment?" she asked, fearing the answer. Lucas looked at her with a mix of guilt and concern. "Jonas and I, along with other researchers, were working on an experimental treatment that could cure rare genetic diseases. It was risky, but it promised to change the course of medicine. Colin," Lucas paused, as if the words were too painful to say. "Colin was the result of that experiment." Evelyn felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Her whole world began to unravel. "What are you saying?" Her voice trembled as she tried to comprehend what Lucas had just said. "What I'm telling you, Evelyn, is that Colin was born with a genetic predisposition, but the illness he's suffering from was accelerated by the experimental treatment Jonas and I were developing. Jonas knew what could happen, but he didn't tell you. He wanted to save his career, even at the expense of his own son. When things started going wrong, he just ran away." Evelyn felt a mixture of nausea, rage, and sadness. All this time, she had believed Colin was simply a victim of a cruel disease, but now the truth unfolded before her like a far deeper betrayal. "How could you let this happen? How could Jonas do this?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking, tears filling her eyes. "We're talking about a child's life. Our son's life." Lucas stood up, taking a few steps toward the lake, visibly shaken. "I regret it too, Evelyn. That's why I came back. I've been researching ever since, trying to find a way to fix what we did. I haven't stopped trying." Evelyn felt like each word hit her harder than the last. She wanted to scream, wanted to free herself from this unbearable pain. Everything she knew, everything she believed about her life, about her son, was crumbling. Jonas hadn't just abandoned her, hadn't just betrayed her with another woman, but had played with their own child's life. Lucas turned to her, his gaze full of regret. "I know I can't change what happened, but I want to help you. I've been working on something that could save Colin. The experiment can be reversed, but I'll need time. All I'm asking is that you trust me." Evelyn looked at him, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Lucas had been part of the betrayal, but he also seemed to be her only hope. "How can I trust you after all of this?" she asked, her voice full of pain. Lucas stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Because I know what's at stake. I'm not here to save my reputation. I'm here to save Colin. I promise I'll do everything I can to fix this, but I need you to give me a chance." Evelyn looked at him, feeling the conflict in her heart. She didn't know if she could trust him, but if there was even the slightest chance to save Colin, she had to take it. It was the only thing that mattered. "All right," she finally said, with a mixture of hope and desperation. "I'll give you that chance, but if you lie to me again, Lucas, it's over. I won't forgive you." Lucas nodded solemnly. I won't let you down." As they walked away from the park, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that fate was leading her down a path she had never imagined. She was about to face the shadows of the past, and though the future looked uncertain, one thing was clear: she would do whatever it took to save her son, even if it meant trusting a man who had betrayed her once before. The answers she had been searching for were starting to emerge, but with them came new questions. How far was she willing to go to save Colin? And most importantly, could she really trust Lucas after everything that had happened? The darkness of the night began to envelop the city as Evelyn said goodbye to Lucas. She returned to the hospital with one thought in mind: Colin. The countdown had begun, and time was the only thing not on her side. Evelyn returned to the hospital with a heavy heart. Every step she took down the long hallway toward Colin's room felt like a sentence, a confirmation that her life was in the hands of a cruel and unforgiving fate. The truth about the experiment that had made her son sick hit her like an endless wave of pain. She had once loved Jonas and Lucas, but now both of them were part of the dark mystery that had turned Colin's life into a constant battle for survival. When she entered the room, she found Colin asleep, his small chest rising and falling with a weak but steady breath. The soft light from the night lamp cast faint shadows on his face, making him look even more fragile. Evelyn sat by his side, gently took his hand, and the tears she had been holding back began to fall. She didn't know how to tell her son what she had discovered, or even if she should. Colin already had enough to deal with. What right did she have to burden him with more pain? As she watched him, she remembered the days when Colin ran through the garden, full of energy, with a laugh so contagious it lit up the whole house. That was before his body began to weaken, before the constant hospital visits became their daily reality. The innocent smile of her son, the one that gave her the strength to keep going, now seemed so distant. The sound of the door softly opening pulled her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Alvarez, the doctor who had been treating Colin since the beginning of his illness. Evelyn had come to trust her, and although the news was always hard to hear, she knew the doctor had done everything she could for her son. "Evelyn, can I speak with you for a moment?" Dr. Alvarez asked quietly, glancing at Colin tenderly before turning her attention back to Evelyn. Evelyn nodded, quickly wiping away her tears, and followed the doctor to a corner of the room. "We know Colin's condition hasn't improved," the doctor began carefully. "But we've received a proposal for a new experimental treatment. I know you've heard this before, and it's a difficult decision, but I want you to consider it. There are no guarantees, but it's something." Evelyn felt a pang of hope and fear at the word experimental. After what Lucas had told her, the word had taken on a new meaning, one that terrified her. "This treatment, what kind of experiment is it?" she asked cautiously, trying not to reveal what she already knew about the past experiments. Dr. Alvarez paused, looking at Evelyn with a mix of concern and professionalism. "It's advanced genetic research, something that could help reverse some of the damage caused by Colin's disease. I know it sounds risky, but in his current state, we don't have many other options. I understand if you need time to think about it." Evelyn felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking about what Lucas had said, about how genetic manipulation had already affected her son's life. But at the same time, how could she refuse any chance, no matter how small, to save him? She clenched her fists, feeling the tension and fear run through her body. "I'll need time to think about it," Evelyn finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can't make this decision lightly." Dr. Alvarez nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. I just want you to know, whatever your decision is, we'll be here with you every step of the way." After the doctor left, Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the city as night began to fall. She was caught between two worlds, one where she had to trust Lucas and Jonas, and another where everything they had done only brought more pain. The fear of making the wrong decision was unbearable. She pulled out her phone and looked at the cryptic messages she had received. She knew there was more to this story, something she hadn't yet fully understood. As she reflected, she decided it was time to confront Jonas. She couldn't keep living in uncertainty, and if anyone could give her more answers, it was him. That night, Evelyn went to the house where Jonas had been staying with his new partner. She knew she was taking a risk, but she was determined to face whatever was necessary to uncover the truth. When she arrived, she stood in front of the door for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm herself before knocking. The door opened slowly, and there was Jonas, his face filled with surprise at seeing her. It had been a while since they'd seen each other face to face, and the silence between them was palpable. "Evelyn," Jonas began, his voice low, as if he didn't know what to say. "I need to talk to you," Evelyn said sharply. "And this time, you can't hide." Jonas nodded and let her in. He led her to the living room, where they sat in uncomfortable silence. Jonas looked different, more tired, but Evelyn couldn't allow pity to deter her from what she had come to do. "I know what you did," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "I know about the experiment you and Lucas were involved in. I know Colin is sick because of it. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Jonas looked at her, guilt clearly etched on his face. His hands trembled slightly as he struggled to find the words. "Evelyn, I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make things right before you found out the truth, but everything spiraled out of control. The project, it was a mistake. We didn't know Colin would be affected this way." "A mistake? We're talking about our son's life, Jonas. He's dying, and you knew this the whole time," Evelyn shouted, unable to hold back her anger and pain. Jonas put his hands to his head, visibly broken by the situation. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm so sorry. I didn't want things to end like this. But when I realized there was no going back, I couldn't face it. I couldn't face what I had done." Evelyn shot up, pacing around the room, her mind spinning with everything she had just heard. It felt like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Jonas, the man she had built a family with, the father of her child, had betrayed her in the most painful way possible. "Tell me how we can save him," she said finally, turning to him. "If you know something, if there's a way to fix this, I need to know. I don't care what happens to you or Lucas. All I care about is Colin." Jonas looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "Lucas, he's working on something. There's a chance to reverse the damage, but it's risky. It's not safe." Evelyn nodded. She knew the word risk no longer held the same meaning. Her whole life had been a risk from the moment Colin got sick. "We'll do it. I don't care what it costs." "We'll do it," Evelyn said, with a resolve in her voice she hadn't felt before. As she left the house, Evelyn knew that the next step she took would be crucial. She was willing to do anything for her son, even if it meant trusting Lucas and Jonas again, the men who had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Time was running out, and Colin's life hung by a thread. Evelyn drove back to the hospital as the city lights flickered around her, but everything seemed blurry. Jonas's words echoed in her mind. "There's a chance to reverse the damage, but it's risky." She couldn't stop thinking about what that meant for Colin. Her son's life had been a gamble since the day he fell ill, and now he was facing the biggest risk of all. What she was about to do had no guarantees, but what other choice did she have? As she neared the hospital, her heart pounded harder. Desperation mixed with hope. She parked but remained in the car for a few more minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The weight of the decision she was about to make pressed down on her. She could save Colin, or if she failed, it could end what little time he had left. Tears began to fall, unstoppable. The weight of the situation was too much to bear. "I'm not giving up on you, Colin. I promise," she murmured to herself, wiping her tears and taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. When she arrived at the room, she found Colin sleeping deeply. His small face looked paler than usual, and his breathing, although stable, was so weak it barely moved his chest. Evelyn approached the bed and leaned down to kiss him on the forehead. His skin felt cold, breaking her heart. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here," she whispered in his ear, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it for him or for herself. Suddenly, the door slowly opened, and Lucas entered the room. Their eyes met, and she could see the worry reflected in his face. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal, Part of her still trusted him. He was her only hope. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said quietly, trying to stay calm. "I wasn't going to leave you alone in this, Evelyn." "Colin is important to me too," Lucas replied, stepping closer to the bed and looking at the boy with sadness. There was a silence between them, loaded with unspoken emotions. Lucas looked at Evelyn as if measuring how much he could say. "Have you decided to go ahead with the treatment?" Lucas finally asked, breaking the silence. Evelyn nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "I don't have a choice, Lucas. I can't stand by and watch him slip away. If there's even the smallest chance, I'm going to take it." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. He knew how risky the treatment was, and though he wanted to offer Evelyn more reassurance, he couldn't. But he also knew there was no turning back. "The treatment is dangerous, Evelyn. You know it's experimental, and the side effects could be devastating. But if it works," Lucas didn't finish the sentence. "It wasn't necessary." Evelyn knew. If it worked, Colin would have a chance to live, a chance that had been slipping further away every day. But if it failed, the consequences were unthinkable. She felt a wave of fear, but she also knew she couldn't live with the guilt of not doing everything possible to save her son. "We'll do whatever it takes." "No matter the cost," she said, her voice filled with renewed determination. Lucas looked at her for a moment, his eyes full of a mix of admiration and pain. He knew Evelyn was stronger than many would imagine, but he also knew she was fighting an unforgiving enemy. "We'll start tonight then. The team is ready. But I want you to be prepared, Evelyn." "This won't be easy," Lucas said, not taking his eyes off Colin. Evelyn nodded. No matter how hard it would be, she was ready. Colin was her world, and she would do anything for him. Hours later, the experimental treatment was underway. Evelyn watched from a small observation room, her heart in her throat. A group of doctors and scientists worked swiftly around Colin, connecting various machines that monitored his vital signs. The room was filled with a silent tension. Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off her son, silently praying that everything would go well. Lucas stood beside her, his expression serious. He knew he couldn't promise Evelyn that this would work, but he wanted more than anything for it to succeed. As they watched the procedure, time seemed to stop. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the monitors showing Colin's vital signs began to beep irregularly. Evelyn's heart stopped for a second. She saw the doctors rush to the machines, adjusting the cables and monitoring every change. The alarms on the monitors made her anxiety spike. "What's happening?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Lucas looked at the screen, his eyes full of concern. "It's an adjustment in the system. They're calibrating the doses so his body can handle the treatment." "Stay calm, Evelyn. Everything is under control," he said, though his tone didn't sound as confident as he had hoped. Evelyn watched, her eyes filled with tears, feeling like every second was a battle between life and death. The doctors continued to work in silence, their faces serious and focused. Time kept passing, and the tension grew with every minute as the treatment progressed. Finally, one of the doctors turned to Lucas and nodded. Lucas took a deep breath, releasing the air he had been holding. He turned to Evelyn with a small smile of relief. "We've passed the critical phase. Colin has responded to the treatment. He's not out of danger, but now we can monitor how he evolves," Lucas said, and although his voice showed relief, he knew the process wasn't over yet. Evelyn let out a sigh of relief, feeling her heart begin to beat normally again. She collapsed into the chair, her hands trembling as silent tears streamed down her face. The fear was still there, but there was a spark of hope, a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to hold back the tears. "Thank you for giving him this chance." Lucas stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't thank me yet, Evelyn. There's still a long way to go. But I'm here with you, no matter what." Evelyn nodded, knowing that despite everything that had happened between them, Lucas was doing everything he could to save Colin. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. That night, as the hospital fell into silence, Evelyn sat beside Colin's bed, watching as his breathing became more regular, stronger. It was a small sign of improvement, but to her, it was a miracle. She gently stroked his hair, remembering the promise she had made to him that same morning, not to give up. And though the battle wasn't over, she had taken another step toward the possibility of saving her son. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the window, Evelyn smiled slightly. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope. Evelyn woke up in the chair next to Colin's bed, her eyes heavy from lack of sleep, but her heart filled with a glimmer of hope. The first light of day filtered through the curtains, softly illuminating the hospital room. Colin was still asleep, his breathing more stable than it had been in weeks. Evelyn leaned toward him, gently stroking his forehead with a tenderness only a mother knows. It had been 2 days since the experimental treatment began, and although the road ahead was still uncertain, something inside her told her that Colin was improving. The doctors were still cautious, but she knew that any small sign was progress. As she watched her son, she heard the door open and saw Lucas enter, accompanied by Dr. Alvarez. They both approached silently, respecting the moment. "How is he?" Lucas asked, his voice low and filled with concern. Evelyn turned toward him, a faint smile on her face. "More stable. For the first time in a long while, I feel like he's fighting, like he's winning the battle." Dr. Alvarez stepped closer to check the monitors and, after a few moments of silence, nodded with satisfaction. "Colin is responding better than we expected, Evelyn. His vital signs are strong. But I want you to understand that we're still in a critical phase. This doesn't guarantee that he's out of the woods yet, but it's a good start." Evelyn nodded, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. She knew she couldn't cling to false hope, but what she was seeing with her own eyes filled her with cautious optimism. She allowed herself, for a moment, to imagine Colin recovered, running through the garden, laughing like before. That image gave her the strength to keep going. "Thank you, Doctor. I don't know what I'd do without your support," Evelyn said, her voice full of gratitude. Dr. Alvarez smiled with a blend of professionalism and warmth. "Colin is a fighter, and so are you, Evelyn. We'll do everything we can for him." Lucas remained silent during the conversation, watching Colin with an introspective look. After the doctor left, he sat in the chair across from Evelyn, his hands clasped together in a nervous gesture. "I know we're not done with this yet," Lucas said, breaking the silence, "but I wanted to thank you for trusting me. I know after everything that happened, it wasn't easy." Evelyn looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. There were days when the resentment toward Lucas and Jonas consumed her, but then there was Colin, her son, improving because of the decision they had made. It wasn't easy to forgive, but she knew that hate wouldn't change what had happened. And right now, the only thing that mattered was Colin's well-being. "It wasn't easy, Lucas." "It still isn't," Evelyn admitted, her voice full of sincerity. "But all of this, it's for Colin. I never stopped loving him, and if that means I have to let go of the past and trust you to save him, I will. But I want you to know something," her voice hardened slightly. "If I ever feel betrayed by you again, I won't forgive you." Lucas nodded solemnly, his expression serious. "I understand, and I respect that. I won't fail you, Evelyn." They both sat in silence for a long while, the only sound being the soft beeping of the machines monitoring Colin. As the days slowly progressed, Evelyn felt something changing within her. The fear that had dominated her life for so long began to fade, replaced by a determination to fight, not only for Colin but for her own inner peace. Later that afternoon, while Colin slept, Evelyn stepped out into the hallway for some air. The past few weeks had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally, and she needed a moment to clear her mind. She walked slowly down the hospital corridor, watching other parents who were also wrestling with their own fears and hopes. She felt connected to them, sharing that universal pain of seeing a loved one face the unimaginable. As she walked, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting it to be a message from Dr. Alvarez or Lucas, but what she saw made her stop in her tracks. A new message from the unknown number that had been haunting her the past few weeks. You still haven't uncovered the whole truth. Jonas is still lying to you. Evelyn felt a knot form in her stomach. She had thought the worst was behind her, that she had faced the most painful truths about Jonas and his betrayal. But this message hinted at something more, something hidden that she didn't yet know. Anger began to rise in her chest, along with fear. What else could there be? What else had Jonas kept from her? Determined to get answers, Evelyn left the hospital and, with trembling hands, dialed Jonas's number. She knew confronting him again wasn't what she wanted to do at that moment, but she couldn't afford to ignore this new threat. After several rings, Jonas answered, his voice tired on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, what's going on?" he asked, seemingly surprised by the call. "I need to see you, Jonas." Now, Evelyn said, her tone firm, leaving no room for objections. There was a pause on the other end before Jonas responded. "All right, meet me at the hospital cafe in 20 minutes. When Evelyn arrived at the cafe, Jonas was already sitting in the corner, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked worn down, as if the weight of his mistakes was consuming him. But Evelyn didn't feel any compassion for him. She was there for one reason, to get the truth. She sat across from him, her eyes locked onto his. "I got a message, Jonas," Evelyn began, cutting straight to the point. "Someone told me you're still lying to me. I gave you a chance to tell me everything, but it seems like you're still hiding something. And I'm not leaving until you tell me." Jonas seemed to tense in his seat, avoiding her gaze for a moment. He took a sip of coffee, as if trying to buy time to find the right words. "Evelyn, I don't know what you're talking about. I've told you everything I know about the experiment and about Colin," he finally said, but there was hesitation in his voice that Evelyn couldn't ignore. "It's not enough, Jonas," she said, leaning closer, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "It's not enough. Colin is fighting for his life, and I'm here, facing all of this alone, while you hide behind your lies. If there's something more, I'll find out. And if you don't tell me now, I swear I'll figure it out myself." Jonas took a deep breath, finally lifting his eyes to meet Evelyn's. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness he hadn't shown before. There were more people involved in the project. Dangerous people. Not just Lucas and me. Colin, he paused, as if struggling to find the words. Colin wasn't the only child affected. I didn't know it at the time, but the project continued even after we left. Some of those kids didn't survive. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. Every word from Jonas hit her like a punch in the gut. Not just Colin, but other children. And there was more behind all of this, more than she had imagined. "And what does that have to do with Colin now?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The people behind this project, they're not done. And they don't want the truth to come out. If they find out that Colin is improving, they could come for him." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. There was something much darker lurking behind all of this. Something that went beyond Jonas's betrayal. And now, her son was in danger again. Evelyn stood frozen in the cafe, Jonas's words echoing in her mind like a deafening sound. They could come for Colin. Fear and desperation wrapped around her like a storm, but this time, she wasn't consumed by paralysis. Something inside her ignited. A fire of protection, of courage that she hadn't felt before. She looked at Jonas, her eyes filled with determination. "If those people want to harm Colin, they'll have to go through me first," she said firmly. "I'm not hiding anymore, and I won't do it again. If they're trying to hide the truth, I'll bring it to light." Jonas lowered his gaze, his face reflecting the weight of his mistakes. He knew Evelyn wouldn't stop, and perhaps, for the first time, he was seeing the true strength that had always been within her. "I don't know how to help you, Evelyn," Jonas said quietly. "I've already lost so much, and I've made mistakes I can't undo. But if you need me to do something, I'll do it. I can't live with this guilt anymore." Evelyn looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and resignation. She knew that Jonas, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't change the past. But there was still something he could do, tell the truth, reveal everything he knew about the project, and face the consequences of his actions. If you really want to help me, Jonas, then you need to tell everything. We'll make it public. You can't hide behind your lies anymore, Evelyn said, her tone resolute. We need to stop the people behind this, and the only way to protect Colin is to expose the truth. Jonas nodded slowly. He knew he had to do it, even if it meant facing powerful and dangerous people. That same afternoon, Evelyn and Jonas met with a trusted investigative journalist who was willing to tell their story. Jonas revealed everything he knew: the genetic experiments, the children who had been used without their family's knowledge, and the disastrous consequences the project had had on their lives. He knew that by doing this, he was putting his own safety at risk, but he also knew that after everything that had happened, he could no longer keep running. The journalist, shocked by the magnitude of the story, promised to investigate thoroughly and expose everything he found. For Evelyn, simply telling the truth was a step toward justice, not only for Colin, but for the other children who had been victims of greed and ambition. As the sun began to set, Evelyn returned to the hospital. She entered Colin's room and, seeing his small body still asleep, felt that despite everything she had faced, there was still hope. Colin was getting better, and now, with the truth finally coming to light, perhaps he could have the life she had always dreamed of for him. Lucas was sitting in the chair next to Colin's bed. He stood up when he saw Evelyn enter, and they exchanged a look of understanding. They knew the battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, they didn't feel defeated. How did it go with Jonas? Lucas asked, his voice gentle but filled with curiosity. Evelyn sighed, sitting down in the chair next to him. We told everything. Finally, the truth is going to come out. It wasn't easy, but Jonas did it. He told the truth, Evelyn said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Lucas nodded slowly, admiring Evelyn's courage. He knew the path they had walked together had been painful and full of obstacles, but he also knew that without Evelyn's unwavering determination, none of this would have been possible. I'm proud of you, Lucas said sincerely. Not everyone would have done what you did. You've been stronger than you think. Evelyn looked at him, feeling that despite all the betrayals and difficulties, she had found some form of redemption in Lucas. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but she knew they both shared the same goal, saving Colin. I didn't do this alone, Evelyn replied. I did it for Colin, and because I couldn't live with the idea that other families would continue to suffer. Sometimes I feel like the love I have for my son is the only thing that's kept me standing all this time. Lucas smiled sadly, deeply understanding what she was saying. A mother's love can move mountains, Evelyn. And you've shown that there's nothing you can't face for him. They both fell silent, watching Colin, who now seemed to be breathing more easily, as if all the chaos of the outside world couldn't touch him. Days later, the story about the illegal project was published. It was an explosion in the media, shaking the medical industry and revealing corruption that had remained hidden for so long. The perpetrators were identified and faced a wave of investigations, trials, and legal consequences. Jonas, although he knew his life would change forever, felt relieved to see that the truth was finally coming to light. But for Evelyn, the most important thing was that Colin was getting better. His body was beginning to respond positively to the experimental treatment. Although his recovery would be slow, each day was a victory. The doctors, who had once been skeptical, now showed optimism about his future. One afternoon, while Evelyn and Lucas were sitting in the hospital garden with Colin, watching the flowers begin to bloom around them, Colin opened his eyes and, for the first time in weeks, spoke. Mommy, are we going home soon? He asked in a soft but hopeful voice. Evelyn felt her heart burst with joy. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not of sadness, but of pure happiness. Yes, sweetheart, Evelyn replied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. We're going home soon. Lucas looked at Evelyn, sharing that smile of hope. Both knew that the road to Colin's recovery would be long, but for the first time in a long while, the future looked bright. As the sun set on the horizon, bathing the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, Evelyn reflected on everything they had been through. She had faced betrayals, fears, and challenges she never imagined, but she had come out the other side stronger. The truth had triumphed, and her son was alive, fighting, full of life. Love, courage, and truth had prevailed, and with that, a new life awaited them. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply in the fresh air, feeling at peace. She had won the most important battle of her life, saving her son. And now, finally, they could start over. What did you think of this story? Tell us in the comments what you would do in a similar situation. We invite you to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends or family as a show of support. This motivates us to keep posting exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We greatly appreciate having you here with us. Click on the links appearing on your screen right now. We have an exclusive selection of captivating stories and guaranteed entertainment just for you. See you in the next video. Take care.